There are certain players who don't just play the game, they leave a lasting legacy. They inspire the next generation, define eras, and create unforgettable moments that fans cherish forever. Our guest today is one of those players. He's been a force on the ice, a leader in the locker room, and a fan favorite for years. It is an absolute honor to have him here to relive some of those memories and hear his stories firsthand. John Ogrodnick, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you. It's great. Great to be invited and great to talk a little history, I guess.
Yeah, well, let's take it all the way back to the beginning. Growing up northern Alberta on a military base, you played a lot of outdoor hockey on some outdoor rinks. Just what was that like, and how did it really inspire the way that you looked at hockey?
You know what? Back then it was all about having fun, I grew up about 3 hours northeast of Edmonton. I think at the time it was the second largest Air Force base called Cold Lake, Alberta. And it was a great place to grow up as a kid. I mean, the Air Force supplied everything. I always tell people, it's not, if you're an adult and you're single, it's not a good place to live, because there's not much to do out there. But as far as a kid, we had the outdoor rinks. We had a beautiful ball diamonds. A lot of it was all free, and the Air Force really took care of it, especially if you had a base commander that loved sports. I remember one time for a baseball tournament, we actually had an Air Force airplane that flew us from Cold Lake down to Edmonton playing a baseball tournament. Hockey, we'd get buses with boxed lunches made for us and all that.
Okay.
But unfortunately, the CO or the base commander they rotate every 2 years. So the next guy would come in. I hate to use a word from way back when, but he was kind of a nerd. And all of a sudden, we were back to carpooling and all that stuff. So fantastic. You just went out, you played outside. All we had to do was shovel the outdoor rinks, but they were made for us. And like I said, it was very, very inexpensive.
How do you think that kind of changed the way that maybe a kid growing up here right in Michigan would look at the game of hockey based on, your experiences playing in those outdoor rinks?
You know what, it was, it's just the way, I know obviously times change. I'm talking 60s and early 70s and stuff like that. And obviously, times change. And, it was colder and stuff like that. We had no problems, having the outdoor rinks. But again, Kara, it was just having fun out there. You know what? You never wanted to sit in your military quarters. You know what? You went out, as soon as school was out, you went, you played outside. Dad actually made an outdoor rink himself in the back, on the backyard in the field behind our house. And, we had the lights and everything, and you just did it. And you had fun. And, back then, obviously, you never thought you were going to play in the NHL. My brother, our family was... we either got Montreal or Toronto games, and we were big Leaf fans, partly because the Montreal games are kind of boring. They were kind of so strong defensively that we just hated 1-0 games and 2-1 games. But we just followed the Leafs all the way up, and as soon as hockey night in Canada was over with, my brother and I'd put our skates on, turn the light on outside, and we'd start fooling around there on the rink and getting stuff like that. So, but from there, moving forward, Dad being in the service, his last transfer, posting, you would say, a lot of his buddies ended up going to Comox, BC, which is on Vancouver Island, to retire, which is beautiful. Dad, he sacrificed himself. You know what? He ended up putting a posting into Edmonton, 3 hours south, still very cold. And, it was good for my brother because he was about to start University of Alberta. And for me, hockey-wise, just to get into the city and get into a good competitive league. We called it Midget Triple A back then. It just really helped out with the hockey and all that. So, kudos to my dad. Like I said, he could have been like all his other buddies and, retired on a beautiful island in Vancouver, or, Vancouver Island, I should say, in British Columbia. And then, started playing Midget Triple A in Edmonton for a couple of years.
Did you, growing up, always know that you had dreams of being in the NHL?
Well, as a kid, you always dream, But, Kara, it's funny, I started, it's whether you can acclimate yourself to the next level, And, I'm playing midget hockey, and I remember going to the Edmonton rink, I forget what it was called back then, but anyways, the Edmonton Oil Kings, the major junior guys were playing, and I'm by the glass, I'm looking at these guys, and they're 6'2", 6'1", 6'3", 200 pounds, I'm like 6'1", 155 pounds, I'm looking at these guys like, these guys are huge, and you're like, I'll never play in this league. But ended up having a couple good years. Well, the first year of midget AAA, and I credit this to a lot of my success, is I ended up breaking my leg halfway through the season. And I had to lay on the couch for like 3 weeks. I had a full cast from toe right up to my hip. And I was so hungry to play hockey and so excited to play hockey again that I had a lot more jump as a 16-year-old. And that's when the goals started happening. And then, in the summertime, I got 2 letters. One was from the New Westminster Bruins, and Major Junior, and the other one was from the Medicine Hat Tigers. And I chose the New Westminster Bruins because, they had a very good organization, number one. But my brother was playing, used to be their farm team, but in what they call the Estevan Bruins, which was in southern Saskatchewan. So then I went there, and again, it's Barry Beck was there. He's 220. This guy was one of the toughest guys. Could play hockey, a very good defenseman in the NHL, but one of the toughest guys in the league. And fortunately or unfortunately, New West just had a big team, and they actually went to the Memorial Cup 4 years in a row. And you know what? I was fortunate to be there when we won the Memorial Cup in '77, and we won it in '78. And even Darren McCarty made a comment, because he's been very fortunate to be on, 4 Stanley Cups, I believe. And he said it's really tough to win a Memorial Cup, and to win back-to-back ones like that, was the highlight of my life, you know what I'm saying? To be on 2 championship teams. And but again, you know what? I went down, I had to play Tier 2 junior in British Columbia as a 17-year-old, because back then, I know it's going to sound screwy, but I had to be 19 turning 20 to get drafted. Mm-hmm. So now I'm 19 turning 20, and they dropped the draft to 18 in my draft year. So it's kind of, so anyways, you didn't want to really spend 3-4 years in the Western Hockey League. I don't know if you understand or if you know this or not, but we had to travel 4 provinces. British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. We had 20-hour bus trips. You got the Ontario Hockey League. They just play in the OHO, right? You got the Quebec Major. I know the guys in the OHO were upset when they had to drive all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie. So anyways, what happened was played in Tier 2, and I tell this story funny, because I was never a fighter. I was a goal scorer. I had a couple scrums, but when I played Tier 2, the kids were my same size. Then now let's say I'm pushing 180, maybe 175, 180, 6'1", and I enjoyed fighting, and I wouldn't wrestle or anything like that. I'd just sit there and throw them, and I enjoyed it. And this didn't deter me, but I tell this story. I said I ended up going with a kid from Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. And we sat there and we fought, and we threw them back and forth for 2 minutes, and none of us ended up going down, and we're both covered in blood. And I was stunned. And it turned out to be Torrey Robertson, who ended up being an enforcer in the National Hockey League. His kid was tough, and he was like... So anyways, I ended up getting called up to New West, and was able to play in the Memorial Cup that year. And again, Kara, it's just acclimating, whether you can acclimate yourself to the next level. And some guys can. It's like an onion peeling. You know what? They're good at this level, they get to this level, and they get to this level, whether they can do it or not.
What do you remember most about those back-to-back Memorial Cup runs? Is there something that stands out to you as, that's something that I'm never going to forget as long as I live?
Well, especially in the Memorial Cup, which was awesome. At the first time you're being televised across Canada, and you're just excited. You're just having a lot of fun. And the second year we won it, we weren't even that good. We barely made the playoffs. But the Bruin organization was just used to winning. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we barely made the playoffs, and we ended up going to the Memorial Cup. And I still got, I run into some guys, Paul McKinnon, who's our accountant, I guess you could say. He played for the Washington Capitals. So if we have, as Mickey would say, a couple Coca-Colas together, I'd always tease him, because he was on that 78 team in Peterborough that we beat. Big Ray Markham, who played a little bit with the New York Rangers. I always tease him because it was Flin Flon, who we played, Flin Flon, Manitoba, which is way up there in northern Manitoba. We had to beat those guys to go to the Memorial Cup in '77. And so you always like to tease them and stuff like that. But That was, as a kid, as a teenager, I guess, it was so exhilarating. It really was. And unfortunately, you know, for people that don't know this, the New Westminster Bruins, like I said, they had a big, strong team. They should have won it, you know, in 75 and 76, and they kind of choked, and they went in 77 and 78. And a lot of kids just didn't want to come into Queen's Park and play. They were so frightened, you know, and that's just the way the game was in the late 70s. And so my last year, unfortunately, there was a bad brawl, so to speak, and there was brawling all the time. And you just had to pair up with somebody that wasn't too much bigger than you. But anyways, what happened was our coach emptied the bench, and I was already out of the game, and the coach from Portland Winterhawks, told their players to stay on the bench. And they were so, I guess, frightened or whatever, but I don't know how they could let 6 guys on the ice get the crap beat out of them. And it was ugly. You know, I heard women and children were crying, and it was bad. I mean, there was, you know, some of our guys just, you know, I don't know what they were thinking, but you don't go 2 and 3 on one. You know what I'm saying? It was just horrendous, and it was so bad that I believe 3 players were suspended for half a season, and that was the end of the franchise. But they had a great dynasty and all that stuff, and I know our coach, Ernie McLean, didn't want that to happen. He had no clue that the other coach was going to tell his players to stay on the bench, and it was just a sad situation. So anyways, my draft year. You know, my agent tells me, John, you're going to go in the first round. You know, my coach calls me in, and I'm not getting as much ice time. You know, Brian Propp and Ray Allison in Manitoba playing for Brandon, where they're racking up 150 points. You know, both those guys go in the first round, and I'm not getting the ice time. You know, the year before, and I totally forgot about this. The year before, I ended up having 59 goals, and Keith Brown was the defenseman for Portland, and myself actually shared Rookie of the Year for the Western Hockey League, which, you know, I'm very proud of that, and I totally forgot, you know, and I actually had some information sent to me, you know, from our family, old news clippings and all that from way back, and I remember reading that, but so the next year everything's going good, but the ice time's getting cut down, so I finish off with like 48, and Ernie McLean says, John, you're going to go in the first round, so draft comes, not taken. In the first round, second round, not taken. Third round, not taken. Fourth round, finally I go to Detroit. So, turns out our coach was a part-time scout for the Red Wings. So a lot of guys from the New Westminster Bruins, the farm team at that point was the Kalamazoo K-Wings. And I said to myself, I ain't friggin' going to Kalamazoo. Nothing against Kalamazoo here, but I said, I'm not going to Kalamazoo. I'm not going to be one of those guys. You know, no offense to those guys. So, ironically, at that time, they just moved the farm team to Adirondack. They're called the Adirondack Red Wings in Glens Falls. Go to training camp in Detroit. Bobby Crown was the coach, and I just worked my butt off. And, you know, one time I got double shifted, and this is a heartwarming story, it really is. We're facing off, and I'm just tired, and all of a sudden I just kind of lose my balance before Bobby Crown drops the puck, and I kind of just fall down, and I get back up, and then Bobby winks at me. I said, well, that's interesting. So they already had their team picked. Foligno was a first-round draft pick, so he was going to play no matter what, and he had a great career, great hockey player. Their second-rounder, they didn't have a second-rounder. Their 2 third-rounders never played, and then in the show, and you know, I was the 4th-rounder, but so I went down to Adirondack. I wasn't even playing that well. Honestly, I was kind of depressed being down there, but you know, I did the best I could and whatever, and as soon as there was an injury in January of 80, so training camp, we're talking the fall of 79, January of 80, Ned Harkness, and people know this, Harkness from the Darkness, they called him way back when. I'm dating myself, but I believe he wanted everybody to have short hair. And there was just a big, you know, the players were like, no, we're not cutting her hair. Ned coming from the college. Anyways, Ned says, you're going up for the weekend. You're getting called up. And I just said to myself, you know, I said, I ain't coming back. And, you know, I didn't say that, you know. But I got a shot on the left side with McCord and Foligno. And we had a great line, and everything just started clicking. And then the first full season, I ended up having a 35 goal. Then I followed up with 40 goal seasons, and eventually having a 50 goal season. But I was very fortunate to be able to acclimate myself to the next level. But I give it the fact, and I tell kids now, you know what, work your butt off. You know what, you work hard, that's when you get your breaks, hopefully, you know what I'm saying? And it usually happens that way.
What do you remember most about, playing in Detroit, all of those experiences, all the people that you were able to meet? What is something that really stands out to you about being here in Detroit?
Well, you know what, it was, first of all, getting a chance to play in the NHL. I guess the good thing about Detroit not being that strong at the time is, you got a chance to play pretty quick, an opportunity. And even now, not now, but in the past few years, like Detroit's kind of struggling here, and all these kids that are getting a chance, they got to try to make the most of it when they get a chance. And I made the most of it. Unfortunately, back then when I turned pro, if everybody remembers, prime rate was, the interest rates were at like 18%, and I believe there was a major recession going on, and they had problems selling tickets. There's a lot of things going on, and I remember that. Obviously, then we drafted Yzerman, then the Ilitches bought the team. That was all exciting. I felt that there was going to be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. But one of the fondest memories I had was when I got called up. We actually played the farewell game, ironically, against the Red Wing Alumni, and we played at the Olympia. And it was the only game I ever played at the Olympia. And I'll say this, and I hope I'm offending anybody, but I said under my breath, I go, I walk in there, it had already been closed down for a couple of months. And when I walk in, there was kind of dark and dingy, and there's rats running around, and I go, Jesus, what a shithole. I go, I didn't know the history of the Olympia. I grew up in Western Canada, And then I realized, and I ended up selling that game out, and just to be able to play against Alex Delvecchio, Ted Lindsay, and all these guys, two things. I was a little nervous because I just got called up, and Bobby Crumb was kind of taking the game somewhat seriously. So I think I was the only guy trying out there. He being just called up, everybody else is having fun. And to this day, I tell people this story. If I had some security, and and I knew I was not going to be sent down in the minors and like that, I felt so bad because one time there was a play and they gave it to Ted Lindsay in the slot. And, if I had security and I knew they weren't going to send me down, I would have said, Ted, take the shot, score a goal. The fans will go nuts. Okay. But I just got called up, and I had to take the puck off him. I'm like, oh gosh, you know what? Which I did. But you know what? Just the whole history of the Red Wings and the names and stuff like that. And Kara, unfortunately, when I played, we just weren't very good, and losing eventually, it gets, once you establish yourself in the league, you want to win. And, in today's game, I feel bad for, Larkin's been here for a long time and he doesn't know what he's missing. And, as far as the playoffs, hopefully Stevie can get it going. Again, you're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel with some of these big kids playing now. But it was just, you're playing for one of the original sixes, and it was just, it was just fun. And then you play in the NHL, and you're playing with your guys, your teammates are guys that you had their hockey cards when you're 6 years old, or 7 years old, or 8 years old, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Pete Mahovla, Gerald Thompson, some of these guys. And so that was all exhilarating and all that, but would have been a lot better. Okay, because after Detroit, and I was really heartbroken. I'd never been traded before, and I went to Quebec. And, at that time, Quebec there's a lot of reasons. Great city to visit, beautiful city. Hockey was fun. Okay. But they just wouldn't speak English to you. Tax bracket was almost 60% with no write-offs. I mean, and we weren't making the $1 million salaries or anything like that. And, but it was exciting because that's the first time I experienced a dressing room packed with reporters. So we beat Hartford the first round, and then we took Montreal to 7 games, the Canadiens, and we went into Montreal when I was with the Nordiques. I know I'm digressing a little bit from the Red Wings, but we just ended up losing, in 7 games. We won the first 2 games, and the fans were going nuts in Quebec City. I mean, they're very emotional. But just the fact that you had a jam-packed with reporters and all that, and just the exhilaration and all that. And I hadn't experienced that in 7 seasons. So I'm going back to Detroit, and it still took them time. What was it, 1997 or 95, 97 when they won the first cup? that's 15 years after Mr. Osh bought his team. And he had some good teams. There were some very good teams with Larry Onoff and all that. And I know the fans are a little disappointed that they thought they had a chance of winning it a lot earlier. Let's just put it that way.
Not a lot of people really understand the amount of effort and dedication that goes into being a successful hockey player, right? Yes. Just what is it that kept you motivated day in and day out to continue pushing even when you were going through those tough years?
You know what? It's one thing about athletes for the most part, you develop very good discipline, and even life after hockey, you maintain, most of the guys anyways maintain a great work ethic. And, because even after hockey, our life, our family, whatever, things have been good, things have been bad, things have been good. When things are bad, you don't sit around and mope, you just got to go out there and work harder. So it's just something, you have to have that desire, and it starts when you're a kid. I wasn't pampered as a kid. I had a summer job. I bought my first used car and stuff like that. And I remember something very profound my mother said to me once, and I finally got, when I was old enough to get a job and I had a paycheck, I forget what I bought. I bought something. Or maybe it was when I bought the car. And, back then it was about $2,000 Canadian. And she says, it does feel good when you work hard, earn some money, and you're able to buy something. It makes that thing you bought even more important to you. It just shows you the value of hard work and, doing what you got. And but it's just something it's kind of bred into you. But it gets frustrating. You know what? Hockey is, and even though I was on very good teams with the New York Rangers, I was there for 5 seasons, half a season with Quebec. Only strong as your weakest link, and I know Montreal fans are going to say, and we're going to play them tomorrow, but we had them, and then all of a sudden, I remember going down the wing, letting a shot go, and I believe Patrick Waugh was in nets, and most of the time I could score low stick side, and this guy made an unbelievable save, and I was like, what? And then, 5-10, maybe, later on in the game, Mats Naslund takes a slap shot between outside the blue line and beats our goaltender between the legs, and all of a sudden the momentum just changed. It's amazing how it can change. And we lost in 7. They beat us. There's no question about it. But we had the momentum going. I believe we had them. Their heads were kind of sagging a little bit. Playoffs are giving 110%. They start giving 95%. You can sense it out there, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden something like this happens, and all of a sudden they're invigorated again. And now you know what I'm saying. And I'm not going to get into this one, but Carrie Fraser, if you ever watch her, she did make that bad call in Montreal by disallowing that one goal. You call it goaltender interference. And I've talked to him about that Ranger Alumni golf outings. He said he still gets heck for that call.
You're not upset about it, though, anymore.
No. You know what? I showed everybody on this video, but they took it off of YouTube. They said the person that put it on YouTube, whatever, so I can't find the video anymore.
Well, you mentioned it briefly, just how different today's game is from when you were playing. But if you had to pick something that you're like, wow, that has really changed from your playing days, what would that be?
The hack and whack. We had the one ref system and intimidation. I always say, people say, well, what would it be like playing today's game? Or even 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The game has changed. There's no more clutching and grabbing and whatever. And, I tell people, what, I believe there's guys in our generation, my generation was 80s and early 90s, that could play in today's game. And there's guys that couldn't. Okay, because there's a lot of guys that couldn't skate as well, but you could clutch and grab and hook and hold and do all that stuff. And there's probably guys that play today that probably would have struggled in our day, because a lot of people, there was hack and whack and spearing, and these are all capped, and the guy didn't get a friggin' penalty, and I'm like, I went up to the ref and I showed him my chicklets. I go, what the frig, and there's no friggin' penalty here or whatever.
Come on.
Yeah, I know. One of my first games were playing Quebec, and I go around Moose Dupont, who was a tough defenseman for the Flyers. I think at the end of the career he finished off with Quebec, and I just went around him, and he just took his stick like a baseball bat, and just two-handed me over the forearms. I go,
what the heck?
And there's no penalty. The game is just totally different. And it's enjoyable. These guys are talented. It's a fast game. There's no question about it. What I liked in our generation, though, especially when we got Probert and Kosher, two of the toughest guys in the league, I liked the fact where the teams could police the game. Because a lot of times, especially when you had the one ref you know what, they don't see a lot. You know what, like when these got semi-knocked out, the ref was still at the other end, you know, and he couldn't catch up to the play. And I'm like, you know, didn't see it. And, you know, I like the fact when those guys were there, you know, the amount of room you had on the ice and nobody really bothered you. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, both those guys are good hockey players and tough hockey players and all that. And they did a lot for the team on the ice. There's no question about it. But the game's changed. You know what? It's faster. I mean, I use these sticks now that are paper light. It's just unbelievable. My skates are paper light. And just the skating that, I just find it easier. Obviously, I'm not as, you know, I'm 30 pounds over my playing weight, but you know what, you get a much more efficient stride with the technology now and stuff like that. But it was fun. You know what, there's no question about it. But intimidation was a big part of the game. It was a big part of the game, you know. I mean, New York, Mike Gardner and I, he was on one power play unit. He was a 50-goal scorer, multiple 50-goal scorer. And myself, on the other unit, we had to stand in front of the net. So we used to tie down what they call like a flak jacket. We made this special thing that was plastic with foam on it, hard plastic that went from your shoulder pads down to your, you know, buttocks. So when guys would sit there and cross-check, you know, they're hitting this thing, and you needed that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, of course, when they got you in the back of the neck, you're like, that didn't feel good. Or they got this one spot behind your knee that's like a little nerve. They know to hit that one spot, and your knee just buckles. It's like, oh. So, yeah, so that's a big difference, you know what. But one thing I noticed, you know what, it took me a while to acclimate myself when I got traded to Quebec. The game was a lot faster. Like when I was with the Red Wings and we went into Boston, there was a certain pace, and then we brought them down, you know, to our style of game. When Bergeron was running practice in Quebec, all we did was line rushes. I shouldn't say that. Let me rephrase that. Let's rephrase that. He did 15-minute practices and are nonstop. And I'm bent over sucking air, and I look over and he kind of giggles at me or whatever. But I tell you, once I got into really good shape, when we went into Boston, the tempo, I know was a lot faster than when I was with the Red Wings going in there. And it was very enjoyable, you know what I'm saying, to acclimate yourself to that speed and stuff like that. And, you know, one thing I say is, and I don't say, you know, I'm fortunate I scored 50 and 40. Yes, you know, we all want to win a Stanley Cup, you know, and I thought with Quebec we had a series shot. We get by Montreal, I thought we had a shot. You know, but they always measure goal scorers in the playoffs. And, you know, if a team doesn't do well, they go, well, you know what, the big goal scorer didn't perform in the playoffs and all that. So a lot of people don't know this. When I was in Quebec, both Michel Goulet and myself both had 9 goals in 13 games in the playoffs. And that was one of my highlights, you know, to perform in the playoffs, not just score during the regular season. And that meant a lot to me because you're measured, you know, by the playoff action.
Well, since your playing days, you've still stayed very connected to the hockey community, doing these alumni games and everything like that. Just why is it so important to you to stay so connected to these foundations?
You know, it's interesting, and I'm going to go back to a question you said, what was it like coming to Detroit when you played? I'm going to just say after I finished and I came back to Detroit and retired in you know, Farmington Hills area, you kind of get out of this bubble of just playing, you know, you do your own thing, you play hockey, hockey's over with, you know, we used to go to Lake George, New York, where my wife's from, and spend the time on the lake out there, and but after hockey, you get to know the true fans of this area, and a lot of, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, we did retire in this area. It was good for life after hockey, because it's a tremendous hockey town. But then you realize the fans and how into it they are with the Red Wings. When you play hockey, you're kind of in a zone, and you block everything out and you just play. So you've got that, and then they got me going to the Alumni, and it just grows on you because you play in all these charity games, and it's a way of giving back, you know. And you know what? I just enjoy it. There's so many good charities and causes out there, Kara. It's just, you know what, and you feel bad. You can't do them all. You know, but I think we're up to about 14, 15 games. I know we're well over 15 games before the virus hit, and some are small. We don't get too many fans, but you know, like we just played one the other day, and it's heartwarming because it was for the Vietnam vets. A lot of guys going, you know, struggling after wars and stuff like that, and it's just a great cause. Another one with the vets also, was for helping to raise money for companions for dogs. And guys would come in there and do a speech, and one guy was almost in tears, and he said, "I don't think I would have survived after the war if I didn't have this dog." So it's just great, you know what? And the guys are good, and but it's a struggle. It's a struggle now because a lot of the guys, Red Wing guys, don't live in town anymore. You got a lot of Europeans that live in Europe. The guys who are on the Cup, they're all working for Eisenman, so they're always on the road scouting, Maltby and Draper and these guys, to try and get those guys out. And I understand it, their time is limited. So it's always a struggle. But it's just the causes and stuff like that. So we try and get at least 5-6 original Red Wings out of the game. And fortunately, there's a lot of guys that play in the NHL that live in the area. They never played for the Red Wings, so it's great to be able to bring those guys in. And people want to see NHL players, whether you're Red Berenson, 85 years old, or Danny DeKaiser, who's 35, 40, whatever he is. He's too skinny to be an alumni. We got to put some weight on him.
What is it about this game that we're going to, play tomorrow that is just so special and keeps you guys coming back year after year?
The guys like it, and I say this many times, it's like, number one, it's like a reunion. There's a few players you haven't seen in 20, 25 years. You get to see these guys. That's going to be a lot of fun. John Pastor, Joe Neville, these guys have put a tremendous amount of work. It's not easy putting these games together, and getting the players and organizing it. They do a fantastic job, and it doesn't always go smoothly, but they stuck with it. And I kudos to those guys because it's not easy. Even players, when they're retired, they have to be babysitters. They need a babysitter sometimes. Okay, okay, guys, we're going from the hotel to the rink. Okay, make sure you're on the shuttle and all that stuff. And but they've done a fantastic job. They've got some great charities, and it's a learning curve for them. I believe it's the third game now. Boston was one of them. Obviously, the New York Rangers was another one, and. They're getting better and better at it as far as raising more money and stuff like that. And they don't take any money or anything like that. And it all goes to charity. And, the charities are great. I believe one is for epilepsy, if I'm not mistaken. And, again, it's a good cause. But it's one of those, Carol, where you can have a lot of fun. You get to see guys you haven't seen in a long time. And you get to do a sport. Nobody hits anybody out there anymore and stuff like that. And you get to play a sport you enjoy doing. And, again, it's another great game for giving back, so to speak. But these guys have done a tremendous job, and it hasn't been easy for John Pastor and Joe Neville to put these things together. They worked their butts off.
Okay, well, you said that nobody's going to hit anybody in the game coming up, but let's take it back to your playing days once again.
Yes.
You played in an era of hockey that was known for being gritty.
Yes.
Was there any time that you looked at the schedule and you were like, oh man, I don't really want to go play those guys?
Oh, no, nothing like that. It didn't really matter, but what I would do, being a goal scorer, I set goals for myself. So I'd look at the calendar in the kitchen and stuff like that, and okay, we're playing Toronto, I got to get 2 or 3 goals, try and get 2 or 3 goals this game. While we're playing Edmonton, Edmonton would beat you, 9-6, so you're going to get plenty of scoring opportunities with Edmonton. But then I go, we're going into Montreal. It's going to be lucky if I get 2 or 3 shots on net. They were so good. The big guys, Guy Lapointe, Larry Robinson, my first few years there. And there was absolutely no room. And they're big. And again, Kara, they could clutch, grab, hook. Just to give you an example, our daughter who was born in 90, Brienne, she missed my career. And she loves coming down to Red Wing games. And she really enjoys it. Our older daughter, so she's in the basketball. She's a Knicks fan, so she lives in the Lake Placid, New York area. The Rangers did a highlight tape, and so we put the DVD, I guess you would say, in the machine. And Kara, I totally forgot how we played the game. We were playing Buffalo at Madison Square Gardens, and there was a scrum behind the net, and it was like rugby. Guys were grabbing guys, pulling guys, going like this. And I totally forgot we played that way. And it was just, but as far as intimidation, no, it wasn't, Junior hockey was different, but I didn't have to worry about that because we always had big, tough teams. Okay, but you still didn't really worry about it. You never, you just got to make sure you keep your head up, and when I played, a lot of guys that were 6'4", 6'5", and I don't mean to degrade them or anything like that, they weren't as agile as they are now. So they didn't really bother me, because I had quickness and could skate. But the one guy, most of his career was with Minnesota, and his name was Kurt Giles, little guy, 5'9", 5'10", stocky, but he could do the open ice hits, and he could blow your knees out. He'd do that hip check, and you had to know when he was on the ice. It's like later on with Detroit, you had to know when Cronwell was on the ice. You had to know when Konstantinov was on the ice, because these guys, if your head was down, you just got to be ready for it. You don't put your head down, And I think sometimes in today's game, I don't want to say they don't hit as much, because there's some good contact out there and stuff like that, but sometimes I don't know if these guys get a little complacent. They got their head down all the time because they feel like they're not going to be getting hit anyways. You know what I'm trying to say? I'm not saying that for sure, but I see some hits. I'm like, gosh, you know what? The guy should have had his head up. You got to be looking around and stuff like that. And but no, intimidation wasn't a part of it back then and stuff like that. It was okay. And the good thing about it too is, they always had for the most part, had a checker on you, and they, he'd kind of like stick you, cross check you, do stuff to, throw you off your game. But once you get into the NHL, the fighters knew who the fighters were. I'm trying to get at. They're not going to go after a goal scorer and stuff like that. But it was, there was hacking and whacking. There's no question about it.
Well, fans always love hearing behind-the-scenes stories, things that happen in the locker room, on the bus, on the plane. Is there anything that stands out to you as maybe one of your most funny moments that happened during your playing career?
I think, there's funny and there was scary. Funny was, I got to think of a special incident, but I tell you what, when we were in Detroit back in the early 80s, one of the coaches they brought in was Harry Neal. And he did color on CBC and stuff like that. And the guy was funny. He was so funny and witty and stuff like that. And he was just kind of a laugh in the dressing room and whatever. But, but I got to think of a certain instance where something happened that was really funny. But I know on the scary side, oh, gosh, we used to fly Air Ontario. We used to charter out of Windsor. And it was a prop plane. And they're all pretty good, but somehow we got some other plane. And Carol, we're going down the runway, and there's flames coming out of it, like backfiring, boom, boom. And I go to Ivan Boulder. I said, we're not getting up because you couldn't feel the thrust, eh? Sure enough, we get up, and this thing's a clunker.
You're like, no, we need back down.
No, we landed in Chicago, and the next night we played Chicago, got back on the plane and come back. Same thing, but this time the guy had to hammer the brakes on. And we didn't get off we stopped at the end of the runway. This thing was a clunker. I mean, it was just, and I remember way back when flying also, we flew Republic Airlines. That's when you could still smoke on a plane. That was terrible. But we blew an engine off a takeoff. And thankfully, the two engines were at the tail, not on the wings. So there wasn't a lot of this and that going on, but they can fly with one engine. But it's just kind of eerie because the siren goes off in the air, in the fuselage, or whatever you want to call it, where people sit, and then the stewardesses were trying to calm everybody down, sit down, put your seatbelt on, but you heard this big bang, and you're like, what the frig was that? And funny wise, you know what? Probably the funny things I can't say here.
I figured one of those was going to come up.
Yeah, initiation and stuff like that, we can't talk about that. So, I'll tell you this story that was kind of cute. It just came to me. I was a rookie and I got called up, and this is when I had a full head of hair. Glenn Hicks. Ted Lindsay was general manager. Ted Lindsay actually drafted me in 79. And Glenn Hicks had the really curly hair, almost like Afro type, it was really curly and whatever. And, all the time he was afterwards with the blow dryer and doing his, getting his going and whatever. Well, they decided to initiate him, and they shaved his head, and he took it harsh. We'd be scrimmaging in practice, and he'd sit in the penalty box by himself, like he just, whatever. And then Ted Lindsay comes down after practice when he goes, guys, there's no more shaving heads. I go, oh, yeah. Yeah, he took it hard and stuff like that. And I don't know if it would have bothered me, but initiation was a lot tougher in junior hockey. It was painful. I don't want to get into that. I think the players know about that stuff, but it was good. It was, the career was good. It just, like I said, it's you come from a team that won 2 Memorial Cups, and hockey's hockey. You know what? Detroit doesn't do well. Do they blame me back then? Did they blame Iserman back then? I don't know. All I know is to win a cup, you need all 20 guys going. You're only as strong as your weakest link. A couple of players can help out, can make you competitive or whatever, but, and that's what made us good with the Rangers. Unfortunately, we never got back by the second round. The one year we won, did the President's Trophy and won the President's Trophy. But we had depth because we had Bernie Nichols' line that was an offensive line, and they had myself with Kelly Kisser and Brian Mullen, so we had 2 lines that were pretty good. And they can't, the checking line can't check both of us. So it all comes down to depth. First line against first line, second line against second line, this, that, and whatever. But it's the same thing. I remember, won't mention his name, tight game in the playoffs against the Islanders. And a defenseman, you could just see it coming to it. He decides to pinch inside the blue line, to pressure the guy. And nobody was backing him up, and all of a sudden the Islanders go down 2-on-1, score a goal, and again the whole momentum changes. It's just a bad mistake here, a bad goal here. Sometimes it's a goal. People work hard, and the puck just goes in. But sometimes it's usually a mistake, where somebody doesn't pick up a check, or somebody doesn't, picks the wrong time to pinch, or something like that.
You have had such a storied career, so many memorable moments, but if you had to pick just one that stands out, that looking back on it, it's always going to give you those same goosebumps that you had when it happened. Can you think of a moment like that?
Well, people ask me, it was when you got your 50th goal. You know what? That was a nice feeling, but again, you're so much in the zone, and I always told people, and it turned out to be true, I'd probably recognize and enjoy it a lot better 10, 15, 20 games years out of the league. You know what I'm saying? And that's the truth. I kind of look back now and say, geez, I did that. Like, it's the highlight tapes and whatever. But playing, Kara, you know what? You're just in the zone and scoring 50 years before. The year before I had 42. Fans remembered in a break in my wrist in Chicago. And there's still 16 games to go, and I should have had 50 that year. And that was interesting, because I had the puck in the center ice, and I just, I passed it to somebody across the ice, and then Troy Murray for the Blackhawks hits me. It doesn't even knock me over. It doesn't do, I go, geez, it feels funny. And I remember going to the bench, and there was a defenseman back then, Bobby Mano, funny guy, Italian guy. He looks down and goes, you might want to go to the dressing room. I go, why? And I look down, and I just see, the thing was like, broken, and... But even then, I'm just saying the goals and all that, you're just in the zone and all that. I guess, 2 things. The playoffs in Quebec, the first time experiencing that was exhilarating. It really was. And we had the Stashny brothers, we had Goulet and Hunter, myself and Lafreniere. We had 3 solid lines. Just the excitement to get a chance to play in the Battle of Quebec. That was exhilarating. And then the next one, I got to say, is just the fact of being able to play at Madison Square Gardens. The best 5 years of our life, I don't want to offend Red Wing fans or anything like that. 1, we had a better team. 2, we lived out in Connecticut. We're on a couple acres of land, and you're an hour away from Manhattan. We're a couple hours away from Lake George, New York, where my wife's from, and beautiful golf courses. I'm not a very good golfer, but I just love the scenery. And, I was fortunate to play in a lot of golf courses, private clubs, Wingfoot and stuff like that. And but we had everything there. And so anyways, in New York it was great. We got to meet some celebrities and all that. And I remember one time we had to do this charity event for ice hockey in Harlem. And we went to a restaurant. Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins were there. And ironically, there was a girl there, and she's like, and she was actually from Detroit. That's what was ironic about her, the Detroit area. She was in the same apartment as they were. Go say hi, and stuff like that. So, I'm kind of nervous. Betty Ann and I go over and start talking to them, and they just finished doing that movie, Bull Durham, and Susan Sarandon played the groupie. One of her first questions was, what are groupies like in hockey? I go, oh gosh, let's move on, okay? But that was a lot of fun. One time, Betty Ann and I went to an event it was called Naked Angels, and it was for struggling actors and actresses. And JFK Jr. was there in a small restaurant. You had an actor and an actress who would just stand up, and it was to help to support struggling actors and actresses. But halfway in, about 10, 15 feet away, here comes Al Pacino. He's kind of hunched over and stuff like that. Matthew Broderick was there and stuff like that. Just some things. I grew up in Cold Lake, Alberta, and here I am in Manhattan, and you see these guys and stuff like that, and it was just a lot of fun. Nothing wild and crazy, and Manhattan loves the Rangers. At some of the top nightclubs, I think the one was called the China Club, big long lineup. We had no problems, getting in. They let us in. So one of the funny stories was, I was with the Red Wings and with McCourt and Foligno and Ron Duguay, who was playing the game. We played together, and but at that time he was with the Rangers, and he ended up taking us to Studio 54. The old classic.
Yep.
I was intimidated. I was like 20, 21 years old, and it was like 3 or 4 floors. And I'm like, what? This is a little intimidating, and a lot of weird stuff going on in that place. But that was a lot of fun. But you got to experience it. Manhattan was a lot of fun, and we had some good teams.
The community of Detroit obviously loves you and appreciates everything that you have done and still continue to do. Just what does the community of Detroit mean to you now that your playing days are over?
It's great. Where I really see it is when after we play these charity games, and you meet the group people that put the charity on and stuff like that, and other people that have helped out. That's where you get to meet them and stuff like that, and it's they're good people, great hockey town. There's no question about it. And they're good, and but you really, like I said, as far as the charity side of it, there's so many good causes out there and stuff like that. But what's good about it too is they still remember the name. You know what I'm saying? Which is good. And it just happens. I used to do a little bit of TV with Passports, and with Dan Miller, who's still on TV. I was actually there doing the games with him when they won in Washington. But as time goes on, there's the newer guys that just retire. So anyways, as you get it. 10 years after hockey, the name fades a little bit. 20 years, the name fades a little bit, but there's still people out there. And one thing that, the other thing too that I like is, going into LCA and Joelis Arena, Betty Ann, myself, my wife and I, we always make a point of it to be nice, and we love being nice, with the people that work there. And I tell you what, it still carries, because when we're in LCA, we're walking to the alumni room, and a lot of guys that work there say, "Hey Johnny, how you doing?" And they just, it's just nice. I'm saying we're nice to them, and they still remember you from back in the day and stuff like that. And but TV does the same thing. All of a sudden I started doing those in between periods, like they're doing now, and it's good for business, and it keeps the face out there and stuff like that, and it doesn't hurt. But the fans are very nice. When they run into you, they're very nice and stuff like that, and they still remember. You're talking like when I was done in '93.
Just the GH Pastor Foundation and this entire event that they're putting on. Just what is it that makes it so special and makes you want to be, a participant in this event?
Well, they do a good job. They do a first-class job, and John Pastor, with GH Pastor and stuff, we go way back, and John really helped me life after hockey, because you played hockey your whole life, and he really helped me out in the business world and introduced me to people. And he's helped out other alumni guys in that same fashion when they're not struggling, but just saying, okay, listen, what do I do now? You know what I'm saying? You're done playing hockey. And he's always been a great guy, and he's got a great heart, and he's got a good business going third generation, I believe, and in construction. But he puts a lot of effort into this. He really loves hockey. Like I said, the first game it actually cost him money, and I think he's starting to get better and better sponsors and all that. Where it cost him money in the fact that he still wanted to give something to the charity. So him and his brother threw extra money in. So we want to try and grow that. And but he means well. His whole thing is he loves doing this. At one point he was thinking about having like a little league of alumni guys where you have a little schedule, where you play other teams, and I think I believe Joe was saying